And so what we found is that as a whole, here in the state workforce for the government, we do pretty well of actually recruiting more women through level 8. In DGO, we recruit more women through level 6. So it's a little bit higher number than the average of the state. Now, here's what's interesting, though. The attrition level between men and women here in the state of Utah, and state workforce government, men have an attrition of 3.96. What that means is that the average turnaround for a man inside state government is 3.96 years. For women, it's 3.82 years. In DGO, there's actually a stark difference. In DGO, the average employee life cycle of a man is 11.29 years, and for women, it's 9.85 years. Now, all those different data points come to us, and we have to ask the question, okay, so what does that actually mean? And how do we actually take the different disparities that we're seeing between representation, between who's in our ranks, how we recruit, and what do we do to talk about the different experiences that are happening within our own organization? Well, to do that, we have the panel today. And so I'd like to introduce the panel real quick. Now, these individuals, first, I'd like to give you a huge thank you for being willing to do this. This isn't an easy topic sometimes, especially amongst our peers, but I'm excited to have all of them here today. First, we have Ashley Greenwood. She is a DGO and UTNG, or Utah National Guard Project Manager within DGO FCM Administration. We have Christopher Hughes, who's the Deputy Director of DGO. And we have Meran Kay, the State Contract Analyst and DGO of DGO Purchasing. So let's give a quick shout out and welcome to our three panelists today, and we'll go ahead and start diving in. Now, if there's questions, please send them in the chat. If we have time towards the end of our webinar and our panel discussion today, we'll go ahead and open it up to the crowd. I'll try to monitor the chat the best I can. I'm running a little solo out here in Vernal. So with that, I'm going to ask the first question, and we'll kick this thing off. So the first question goes to Ashley. So Ashley, based on some of the numbers that we saw, there's obviously some opportunities there, specifically in DGO with the male dominated fields that we have, whether it's DTS, facilities, etc. So through your experience, Ashley, how can organizations better recognize and value the contributions of women in traditionally male dominated fields? And in particular, have you had any successes or barriers that you've encountered throughout your career? And with that, I'll hand it over to Ashley.
Thanks, Wesley. First and foremost, I do kind of want to distinguish that recognition and value are kind of two separate things. Recognition can be in the form of equal pay. We do know that as women, we are generally paid 2% less than our male counterparts, even though we may even have the same or more experience. Value is, can be something as simple as listening. As a woman, if we speak up, for any reason, if there's something bothering us, if we're overwhelmed, if we're stressed, be a sounding board and be that person that listens. As a woman who is very familiar of being one or two women in a room of 75 men, encourage us to speak up. Encourage us to speak our opinions and our own suggestions and value those. Too often we are diminished, and too often we feel like we can't speak up, and we are afraid to speak up and share those ideas. Some of those, barriers that you speak of are just simply support and encouragement for career development, knowing where to go, knowing what our career path is. And the biggest support that we can get from an organization is a mentor or a person in our corner. It doesn't even have to be a mentor, but it could be a peer.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that, Ashley. So what would you say, I'll throw a little bit of, not necessarily curveball, I'll throw a little bit at you. When we talk about advocacy, right? We talk about mentorship and we talk about advocacy. What does that mean, to you specifically in your own experience of being a woman in a male dominated field? What does advocacy look like to you?
I think it's just having that support. There's a lot of double standards, at least in my industry and construction, and has been for some time. There are a lot of double standards with the way to how women are perceived in my industry. So having that support and having that advocacy, having somebody that recognizes your contributions and your experience and values and says, hey, Ashley has a good idea, let's hear her out. Or Ashley, shared this with me privately, maybe it's something we can implement. Just having someone, again, a peer, your boss, anything, somebody that's going to support you and recognize the good that you do and what you bring to the team.
I really like how you shared that, Ashley. Specifically, when we talk about advocacy, they don't necessarily need to be in the room with you all the time, right? I mean, they're being an advocate for you wherever they're at in the organization. I like how that kind of stood out to me about how we'd be better advocates for really all of our team members. Meran and Chris, do you have anything you want to add to that question that was asked to Ashley?
I don't. I think she answered it wonderfully.
I don't either.
No, that's a pretty good job. You did great, Ashley, on that question. So with that being said, I talked a little bit about why we're here. We talked about the statistics. We talked about some of the different challenges when it comes to advocacy and the differences between advocacy and activism, which we'll talk about later. So Chris, to you, then I'll open it up to the other panelists. Why do you think this discussion is important to DGO today with where we are here in 2023?
Yeah, I think this discussion is very important today for the reasons that you started with, Wes, is that this discussion helps us to create a stronger culture of belonging and foster a better understanding, especially for women in the workforce. This discussion can happen in a variety of different topics, but I think this discussion today helps us to create the conditions and set expectations for what is expected in the workforce and what we can learn from the different perspectives and experiences from women in the workforce. I think it's at times it can be tough for people to even identify that they have a different perspective from somebody, even when it's related about a work related issue. But when it comes to maybe more of a personal issue, like being a woman in the workforce, that can be extremely difficult for someone to actually open up and discuss. So hopefully what we learn from this is that, to Ashley's point, is that we can have those discussions, whether it's in a larger group or with a peer, one-on-one with a peer, in which that position will be advocated for. So, and hopefully this will just help everybody become a lot more engaged at work. I know that there's studies out there that talk about if somebody doesn't feel valued or they don't feel like they're a part of the work culture, they're not feeling valued, then they become disengaged. They almost begin to quiet quit. And we don't want that here at the department. We want to make sure that everybody has a voice, everybody is able to speak up and has essentially a seat at the table.
No, thanks for sharing that, Chris. I really like what you talked about there, because we're really talking about intent and impact, right? And a lot of different organizations have this intent that, hey, yeah, we want to make sure that everyone's perspectives are heard. We want to have a great culture. But a lot of the times, how the organization does their processes, does their procedure, interact with the team, it really has a negative impact, because people feel like, one, they don't feel safe enough to be heard. Two, they don't feel encouraged enough to actually be able to speak and know how to do that in the right settings. Is there any best practice, Chris, that you could say that would help us get over that barrier of how do we communicate, how do we actually connect with people, just in your experience that you've had, specifically as a DGO, a deputy director?
I think the best practice is just being able to have open and honest communication and not fear that what you say could get you in trouble. I know I've been in a lot of conversations with people where it's the first time that they're expressing an opinion on a matter, and they're just fearful that someone is going to be offended by what they have to say. And if we can learn just to have those open and honest communications and realize that sometimes by bringing up those conversations, you're opening up a blind spot to somebody else, that there's going to be resolutions and that a better culture can be formed by just simply having those communications.
Outstanding. Thanks, Chris. Ashley and Meran, anything else you want to add to that?
I just want to appreciate Chris pointing out the quiet quitting. And this is something I just recently kind of was thinking of myself, that women are less inclined to speak up when we are stressed out and overwhelmed. And it's going to take us a lot longer. And by the time we do speak out, we've probably passed the point of where we should have spoken up.
That's a really good point. Thanks for sharing that, Ashley. What about you, Meran? What What do
I
you
don't
think?
have anything.
Awesome. No, I think that's super important when we talk about creating an atmosphere and environment of vulnerability, right? To be able to speak those different topics that come to us. The one thing that I talk a lot about in some of the trainings and in DHR, we talk about the meeting after the meeting. Has anyone ever been to the meeting after the meeting before? I think most of us have, right? And what we try to do, and what Chris is alluding to, is we're trying to get rid of those meeting after the meeting so we can talk about the different things while we're there at the table, and have that vulnerability to be able to have what I call candor. And I think hearing from Ashley and Chris, I hear a difference between brutal honesty and absolute candor. And when I hear brutal honesty, I hear an emotional event. But when I hear candor, I hear really someone trying to communicate their intent, to communicate what they're thinking, and even the pros and cons of the different situation in front of them. So I think that's right on par. So thank you so much for sharing that. The next question goes to Meran. So Meran, what are some of the unique challenges that women face when it comes to balancing work and family responsibilities? Now, when we talked about the data before, one of the things that Dr. Madsen talks about in her white paper, which Jennifer K. Weaver will put on the internet, so we'll all have a chance to look at it, talked about the different culture of Utah as a whole. And the uniqueness of Utah. So with that being said, how can organizations actually help and address those type of challenges?
Sorry, I'm on mute. I think one of the biggest challenges is for working moms. I am a mom of 5 kids, and so it's hard to balance work life and family life. So trying to figure out like if it's worth it to miss your kid's school program, or what do you do when your kid calls from school sick? So you're the working mom, so who's going to take the child to the doctor's appointment? So there's so many worries as working moms. I think the biggest thing that organizations can do to address these challenges is just to be flexible and understanding. In my division, they're very understanding when it comes to family. I had someone on my team tell me that if you have a family emergency, just leave. We understand. We'll take care of it. And so I thought that was pretty cool coming from a government agency. I also think just offering support and being understanding when something arises at home. As an individual myself, what helps me balance work and home life the most, I know this is kind of silly, but it's my calendar. I live off of my calendar, and so I keep it, so when I'm making appointments, I can see my work appointments and my kids' appointments, so I'm not overlapping them, because I'm the mom that still likes to be to all my kids' things, but I want to do really well at work, and so it's like, do you miss work? Do you miss your kids' things? And so if I can schedule them all, I can do my best to do both. And my division's very good at letting us take off an hour of work if we need to take the kid to the doctor's appointment and come back, or, flex your time somewhere. They're very understanding and very flexible. And moms now, I feel like they don't get jobs because they don't want to have to choose. And lots of moms would get jobs if they had the flexibility, I feel like. So I just think just understanding and flexibility within the workplace is very, very helpful.
No, thank you so much for sharing that, Meran. I really like what you're talking about. What's interesting, a perspective. So I'm a father of 6. My wife, we're looking at she stays home. What's interesting is that there seems to be this kind of unwritten allowance for me to say, hey, I'm working, so I can't do X, Y, Z. And what's interesting is that my wife and I had this conversation where she goes, you could do these things too. Like when we talk about flexibility at work, there's this emphasis that we've seen across the board, at least some patterns of where, we need to make sure we talk about women's flexibility at work. It's like, well, men could do that as well, right? But there's this unwritten rule that says, hey, the men has to go to work, we need to do this. And then when we have that parallel, when we have that discussion, it seems to be a gender discussion instead of an employee discussion. I think what you're talking about really brings light to that one of those types of a sort of disparity, if you will, and the different thoughts between them. So thank you so much. See, Chris and Ashley, you want to add anything to that?
No, I just think it's great that we have some divisions here that are allowing for that sort of flexibility. I like to consider myself as when I was a kid, I grew up with a mom in the workforce, literally grew up working with her. She was a bank teller for Zions Bank. in a Dan's grocery store. And in the back room in the late 80s and early 90s, me and my brother grew up in that back room because they allowed her with that flexibility to be able to come pick us up from school, allow us to stay there for a few hours, and really allowed her to still be a mom, to be able to have us there, be involved, take us out when we were sick, but acknowledged where that responsibility fell. And I think it's great when you can have that flexibility and that it's openly discussed and not seen as something you shouldn't be looking at.
No, thanks, Chris. I really like that. You know, you can actually liken that to the working from home and the telework, right? I was in a meeting just the other day, and it was a virtual meeting, and someone on the other end, their kid walked in and said, "Hey, can I get something?" and walked out. And in some circles, that's frowned upon. But in our division and what we're looking in DGO is like, when you work from home, that is part of the norm. And when that's part of the norm, people are starting to understand that, hey, yeah, we can still be our authentic selves. I'm a father, I'm a mother, I'm a whatever it might be, right? A dog owner, right? I'm a mother or father of a pet, which is another big one. That's normal, and that's who we are when we talk about creating connectivity, when we talk about creating belonging. So, Ashley, what role do education and training play in helping women build their skills and advance in their careers? And how can organizations provide more opportunities for women to develop these skills?
So I think this question is very dependent upon individual industries. Speaking from my experience with construction, you know, while education did play a role in getting me started, the bulk of my skills and ability to advance have been in large part from just site experience. So again, I speak of advocacy, you know, finding and having a partner or a mentor, you know, that would be with me on job sites. Someone in my corner was a huge help that, you know, I could have those candid conversations with. While we as women do need to take some initiative and some first steps and not be afraid to ask questions, especially of those with more experience. And a lot of times, those who have much more experience are actually excited to answer those questions. So understanding that and not being afraid to speak up, I think is something that we as women can take on. I think organizations can help foster a lot of this simply by keeping their employees informed and even maybe having a mentorship program. They have more knowledge of outside organizations, so associations, anything that are industry related or just related to what we do, you know, on a day-to-day basis. Connecting us with those industry associations and organizations, I think, is a wonderful thing to have because they always have training, they always have all kinds of workshops, and those are very valuable, I think, and that helps with networking and team building. So me personally, team building, networking has been invaluable in my career.
No, that's outstanding. Thank you so much for sharing that, Ashley. What stood out to me when you talk about the looking forward, right? It's also being able to provide it from a leadership point of view. I'll give you an example. Now that vernal's starting to finally warm up, we got some grass coming in, and I'm assigning chores out to my kids. And I'll connect to how this is so important to what Ashley just said. I usually do the same thing. Okay, boys, let's go out. I got 3 boys. We need to go out. Let's go ahead and get the weed whacker out. Let's get everything mowed, and then start working on the sprinkler system. And that's how I've done it for years since the boys have been old enough. Out of nowhere, my daughter comes up. She's 13, and she's just this beautiful little thing. She says, "Hey, Dad, I'd like to learn about the sprinklers." And what was interesting about that is not once did it cross my mind that she would be interested in learning about the sprinklers. And so when we talk about advocacy and finding opportunities, a lot of times what we can do is we can look at opportunities for everybody and start spreading that around and saying, hey, everybody could use this type of training. Everyone could use this type of upskill. And so when we look at education, you know, we're also looking at, like what you said, Ashley, that networking piece. That's not something that you usually find, you know, at a USU online or something like that. It's something that's taught by someone next to you, a peer usually, or a mentor. So I really like what you shared there. What about Chris or Meran? What stands out to you specifically about education?
I think we do need to go educate ourselves and take that time to be able to. It's not like going to college and law school, there weren't a whole lot of courses I could take to say, hey, this is what you need to know about women in the workforce, or this is how you need to approach this. And here are some of your unconscious biases, and here are the challenges that they face. It's about going out and reading articles, books, and researching on the subject, and actually talking to your colleagues on this issue to be able to understand what they're going through and their experiences, so that you can get a better understanding of what's going on. I think once you do that, then you can reflect on your own biases and see what you can do to improve that. So I think education is absolutely key.
Oh, thanks so much, Chris. What about you, Meran? What's on your mind about that?
So this is kind of my question on the next after Chris. So I'm going to just wait and answer it then, if you're good with that.
No, that sounds great. Thanks, Meran. Okay, that brings us back to you, Chris. So your question is, how can men be more active and engaged allies and advocates in promoting gender equality in the workplace and supporting women in their career paths?
Sorry, muted myself. I think we need to listen and amplify women's voices. We need to be taking that approach of actively listening to women's perspectives and experiences in the workplace, and encourage them to speak up. We've had that conversation that we shouldn't be worrying about the conversation after the conversation, right? We should be looking to have those in a bigger instance like we're having here today. I'm very grateful, Wes, that you were able to set this up. And this is something that you and John and all of DHRM have been focused on, is how can we do this? I know that this was an instance where we were able to look into this. Jenny was actually able to talk about a women's institute that Wendy Pirate at the Division of Purchasing is attending and gaining information thereon. But I think what we all can do is actively listen and not just downplay other people's concerns. I think that's one of the worst things that we could do in on this, is just think, oh, well, that's just their perspective. I don't have a bias. In my mind, I probably do have unconscious biases that I need to become more consciously aware of. And the only way that that's going to happen is through dialogue and discussion. We also, and I'm seeing a comment come up. We need to set up ways for mentoring. I think if we can set up those mentoring opportunities for, it's not just a great cross-training ability, but allow people to be able to understand what others are going through. We did run a trial of a mentorship program here in the Department of Government Operations, but not with the understanding of this was women mentoring women on some of these workplace issues. But a lot of the comments that came back reflected that and told us that we needed to create more dialogue on this issue. And we also need to get a situation, and I like this comment about getting male managers and supervisors to trust their capability and let women take the lead on projects. I don't think that happens enough. Is we need to be able to, and that can be a part of a mentorship program, is getting those practices in place where we do allow women to be able to take those lead roles. I'm going to do a shout out right now. We have a huge HCM payroll program going on right now, but to begin that, we needed to do a solicitation, and Sherilyn Hess at the Division of Purchasing has done a tremendous job to lead a very big project, a very sensitive project, and move that solicitation on from beginning to end in what I can only say was probably one of the biggest and fastest procurements I've seen in government. But by giving her that opportunity, we've seen growth. And her manager and I have talked a lot about that and being able to see her grow and come of it. And we should be looking for more of those opportunities.
No, thanks so much, Chris. What stood out to me there too is when we talk about male managers, especially so DGO is relatively unique. I think save corrections, the difference between the ratio between men and women are very, very high in DGO, which is, like I said, I think just right behind corrections when you look at 33 to 66%. And what's interesting is a lot of the time, men, I'm using myself as an example, take certain traits and certain skills for granted, and we don't look for other different things. When we talk about training specifically the male managers, if there's one piece of advice, kind of put you on the spot here, Chris, if you could give a piece of advice to the male managers, what's the one thing that you would say that could help them in this realm?
The one piece of advice I'd give is align yourself with a female in your organization. I took that upon myself early when I became a division director. I brought Wendy Apirath along with me for that ride because I knew a lot of my weaknesses were her strengths, and a lot of those weaknesses that I had helped to move the division of purchasing moving forward. And I mean that in a very positive way. Is she had strengths where I didn't, and she was able to bring me along and teach me how to communicate better with people. Probably still not the best. I'm sure I'll be getting a lot of IMs and memes and GIFs from the division of purchasing following that comment, but I can say that she was helping me to kind of connect better with people on some of these issues and understand different perspectives. And I would say taking the role of yourself or as a male manager and applying that to a female as well. I see this more and more, right? In my life, I get to see me taking time off to take the kids on field trips, take the kids to school, take the kids to doctors, and realizing that's going to happen on the other side as well, that women need to do that as well. But I also see our director of HR, he's a great example of that, John Barron. I got to take a phone call with him last week where he had just gotten back from a doctor's appointment with his son. And I think that's a great example of everyone seeing that this stuff is becoming a lot more mainstream, but that we shouldn't be just saying, hey, that's the women's role, or hey, they're going to have to take care of that. So we're not. So as a male manager, I can't advance that person because they're going to actually have that other side gig as a family where I don't. So it's good to see that it's becoming a lot more mainstream.
No, thanks, Chris. That's absolutely imperative, especially when we look at how mentorship has happened really over the past, whether not just in the state, but in a lot of organizations where a lot of business happenings and relationship building are done one-on-one over lunch, or they're done after hours, or they're done on the golf course. And what we find is that when you look at how those relationships have been built over time, they're primarily in the male-centric role. It primarily happens with, hey, I'm going to take my buddy out. We're going to go try to build relationships. And what we have to do is that men have to realize, and us as a whole, we have to realize that we have to change our strategy and our tactics to better create that belonging and create that mentorship and be those advocates in those realms. So I think that's spot on. Ashley or Meran, is there anything else you want to add to what Chris has said?
No, I think you said it very well.
So when I first started, had a male manager, and I think the best thing that he did was he was very supportive. If a training came along, I said, hey, should I take this? Yes, you should take that. Like, he always told me, yes, I should do that. I should do that. So I think just supporting people under you and like encouraging them to do things is very helpful.
I think you're spot on. Thank you so much. And Chris, I don't know if you can see it, but when you're talking about what male managers could do and everything, my computer's blowing up with all the claps and the thumbs up. So good job. That's a tough question. You did really well on that one. So well done. All right. And the last question that we have. Sorry,
Wes, can I just say, and one thing else is we need to get better at public recognition of women, especially in leadership, of recognizing them. I hear a lot of good things on one-on-one conversations about some of our women leadership, but I don't know if that's being broadcast out to the department or to your divisions in whole. So I just think as we do that, it helps start that conversation and helps to do that recognition as well.
I think that's absolutely key. Recognition goes a long way. One of my favorite quotes, and this is my military coming out, but it's one of Napoleon's quotes where he said that a little bit of ribbon will make the soldier go a long way, right? And so it's all about that recognition of the real value that individuals bring. And I really like the distinction that Ashley talked about between recognition and value as well, and be able to balance those together, and that they need to go in tandem so they have that balance. So thank you so much, Chris. All right, so Mary, last question to you is another education question. So in your perspective and through your experience, how does the role of education play in your life, and how's it happen throughout your career?
So I grew up in a family where, sorry, I'm like kind of giving stories, but I grew up in a family where my mom pushed education very heavily and said every woman needs to be educated. So she pushed that, and then I went down to law school. But I honestly wouldn't have the job that I do today without my education. So even if you're going to go, get an education and not use it, it will come in handy. I think once you have a job, it's important to continue that education. I don't think anyone can be overly educated. In my personal life, when trainings come through my email, I'm the type that's always, hey, I'll do that. Hey, can I sign up for this? Can I do this? And I just like to keep my education going. When I first started, a class came through the college. It was like a community college. It came through my email to take. And so I decided, yeah, I'm going to take that class. It was on procurement. And I didn't have a lot of experience in procurement, just more contract experience. And so I was like, this would be great. I took it and it helped a lot. So I think, honestly, just taking those trainings that come through your email and doing them. Like, I know people don't, I already have the job. I don't need the education. But when you're looking at two people to move up or advance, like, you're going to stick out more if you have these certifications, these trainings that you've done over someone that hasn't done anything. I mean, if that you're the type of person that likes just sit there and, you're fine with your pay, you're fine where you're at, then great. But I think everyone, regardless of where we're at, can always use more education and more training. So I challenge all of you, when the next training comes through, take it. Our division, and one more thing, our division is very good at sending them over. And if there's something that we're interested in or think that we need help with, or we want to advance one of our skills, we can bring it forward to the CPO and just say, hey, is there a training on this? I'd really like, more experience. And I mean, usually they're going to tell you yes, if it will help your job. So yeah, take the training.
That was fantastic. Thanks, Meran. Chris and Ashley, is there anything else you want to add to Meran's comment? Nope, looks like we're pretty good. All right, so we're coming up on time here. First off, I want to just say thank you to our wonderful panelists. Excellent job. And to all those who are actually sending message in the box as well. Great feedback. There's some really neat stuff in there. With that, we do have about 5 minutes, not quite 10 minutes left. We wanted to leave about a quarter to the hour. With that, are there any questions? And I think we're okay with the panelists if we can take a couple questions. Got some north and south. Are there any questions that the group would like to ask the panelists? And if you just type them in the chat, I'll get them over to the panelists. Not a problem. Give you a couple minutes for that. No, maybe you three just did awesome. Answered all the questions on the first go. That's pretty good. Pretty good on it. Okay, so with that, we'll go ahead. I don't see any questions coming in. I don't see any hands raised. So with that, sorry,
one question is, where are some resources we can find information on trainings? So I would just say work with your division directors. They should be able to identify the types of trainings that you may need, or even as we're talking about moving into performance management, identify those trainings in your UPM plans, and so that they become a part of making you successful. Those managers will be held accountable to those UPMs as well. And if you're identifying trainings that your manager and you agree to, make them a part of your plan so that there's some accountability there.
That's perfect. Thanks, Chris. Another question came in. How is this conversation going to continue over time? And so I can answer that one. What we've done is we've developed a committee over this particular challenge. And the intent is to bring the different opportunities and topics to the committee, and we assign those questions when we bring the panelists in. And so, like I said, this is the first of a series. We plan on doing this Elevate Her series once a quarter through the next year, but it's also designed to really build on belonging as a whole. And So we'll still have the Elevate Her Challenge, but we'll also be able to morph that into culture, really, and different aspects of belonging, of identity, and how we actually better become team builders and executioners in our practice in the best way possible. So that's how we're going to move a little bit forward. So with that, I think there's one more question. Are there plans for networking events where we can meet and network with women in other divisions or in person? What team or panel, do you know of any? I don't have any on top of my head that we're doing from the DHRM side yet, but I can tell you that's probably going to be a topic of the committee to talk about the next time we go. Is there anything that the panel want to add to that at all? Okay, yeah, we'll definitely work on that one and go from there. So, all right, with that, I think we've had all the questions. I just want to give a special thanks to Chris, to Ashley, to Meran, and everyone here today. Thank you so much for beginning this journey with us. A lot of these things aren't very easy to talk about, but what I found is that when we're in this setting and we have the vulnerability and the bravery to talk about it, we can really make some things move forward. This particular session is recorded. It'll be on the internet, as well as the demographics and the statistics that I shared before. Those will also be posted there, so you can read Dr. Madison's white paper, which is fascinating, and you can see the Wallet Hub. So with that, I hope everyone has a wonderful week, and just thank you so much for coming. And again, thanks to our panelists for their time today. Everyone have a wonderful week. Take care.